In light of what you just said, which is entirely true, obviously the thing also is why we have a situation where the US imperial hegemony is supplying all the weapons, most of the weapon systems, and actually driving this whole thing under conditions where now the bulk of the population of the US is now reducing. And if you speak in the US, you're sacked, or you're removed from universities or whatever else. The second thing, we now have a situation for some reason where politicians this week met in secret in the British Museum to celebrate this battle, because they know that if they say it publicly, there will be protests. It's incredible. Government in Scotland meets in secret with the Israeli embassy because they know everybody hates the idea. It's madness. The whole thing is just incredible.
Thanks very much, Tom. Sorry. So, the beginning of your talk was so accurate, it's so hard to find words these days. The comprehension is impossible about the level of protection that the Americans offer, the amount of protection they give to Israel, despite the fact that Israel gives them nothing. Israel has nothing to offer them other than taking, and that was something that I heard sort of thought about in relation to Trump's big programme of getting trillions of, what was it, MAGA? Make us better, make us great again, as if we ever were. And the thing about the BBC, I see that very linked to the monarchy, because if you actually take the BBC away from the monarchy, then people can attack the Commonwealth, they can attack everything that a racist colonial state stands for. And this is the thing that I see being broken down here, which can only continue. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop anything in Gaza. But people are joining dots, people are understanding how successful the Zionist machine has been in peddling lies for over 100 years, They arrived in Palestine in the mid-1800s, we're pioneers, blah, 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 we're wonderful and welcomed with food, with hospitality, with everything else. And they've managed to drip feed in their colonial dirt, as far as I'm concerned. This mode of thinking that this is okay. Menachem Begin being a known terrorist, ending up being a prime minister. Oh, we have somebody else appointed now. And then it's terrorist, known terrorist, with a bounty on his head, now doing deals with America. It could be laughable if it wasn't such a tragedy. My question is, what information do you have about children that have been allowed out of Gaza into Egypt for treatment? I don't know if there have been children allowed into any other neighbouring nations, but I heard pretty cruel responses from the emergency, not the Egyptian services, so I'll start there.
So during the ceasefire, during the brief 3 week ceasefire, around 1,200 children were allowed out. Unfortunately, and this is what we're trying to do, is take them for treatment, as many of them as the majority still remain in Iraq. The majority still remain locked up in really shabby government hospitals in the Sinai Desert, treated as a security risk. And so what we hear from the patients that we're bringing to Lebanon are horror stories of the families having to go out and bring antibiotics from the local pharmacy, of them having to bribe the guards on the hospital to get food or to get access to clean clothes. And so that, but it's part of the kind of, it's part of the hermetically sealed Gaza Strip. Today we know that none of this had it not been for the role that the regional Arab governments play in ensuring that Gaza is completely isolated. And there were still 4,500 children who needed urgent medical care, still stuck in Gaza. And the fact that there are 4,000 children who need urgent care in Gaza is an indication of how many of the women are dying. So that after 100,000 were injured and the absence of a health system, only 4,500 need treatment, means that the others have died either from their wounds or they died from newer wounds. Because when you're watching TV now, you see people wounded with external fixators and bandages being taken into the ambulance with yet another injury, and that repeated injury is killing people, and that's why we're not getting that many children. The solution is to rebuild the Palestinian health system, to treat these kids. That's the solution. Not taking them out, but we need to get the teams in, we need to get the medication in, we need to get the field hospitals in, and we need to help rebuild that health system. The reason that health system was destroyed so that these children died.
Thank you, sir. Can I just ask you, do you think that Israel has become or will become a major burden on the Western government to defend, given the major disconnect between our governments and the people? Is this, do you think what's happening now, or is it something likely to happen in the near future?
So, when we think back, it's the Pied Noir in the French settlers in Algeria and the French right and the French military who brought the Gaulle back to power in the second election. And it was the Gaulle who reached the point that Dr. Abdullah alludes to, in which he came to realize that it was either going to be France or the Algerian colonial project. And that's when he pulled the plug on the settler colonial project. Settler colonialism, like imperialism, is at its essence an economic endeavor. The killing of Palestinians has aided global capital in frightening the populations of the third world into accepting their lot in life. The killing in itself is part of the extraction of international capital from the third world, and that's why it's performative. And so, but you're wrong, and that's our job. Our job, and there are moments when you think it just can't possibly happen fast enough, when every 48 hours 300 are killed. But our job is to be part of that equation that the settler colonial project has to become a loss maker. It becomes a loss maker through the US. It becomes a loss maker politically when it becomes a source of destabilization in the elections, in the local elections, when it looks like they either lose control at home or abroad. Settler colonial projects are the ones that pay the price. And that's what easily quantifiably measurable thing. 3,300 university students in the United States being arrested. Universities here cracking down, people losing their jobs, people being arrested, 65 doctors facing their license being withdrawn at the General Medical Council. All of this is actually signs that this is working. The problem is that you're facing a system that was built over 77 years, and that you've just been now able to even map it out. I mean, one of the things that Gaza has done is it has lit up the system. It lit it up not just the system that we used to see, but the rest of the system, these institutions of power, the royal colleges, the British Medical Association, the BBC, the media, everything, the trade unions, and what happened, and how they were excavated during the 70s and 80s, and why they were excavated during the 70s and 80s, so that you can have easily a genocide with zero response to the labor movement. All of this is as a result that the system is being challenged. The problem is, you just, one day, it will give, one day, white South Africans got together and realized that the system was no longer defendable, and if they persisted, they would lose everything. One day, the Mo woke up and thought, these people want to get to power, or I'll either lose France or I'll lose Algeria. One day after the Tet Offensive in '68, people met at the Pentagon and made a decision that the Vietnam War was unwinnable and that they needed to go into serious discussions with the Vietnamese. That's what's happened. The problem with settler colonial projects is that their graph is not one of gradual decay like normal countries. It is one of a plateau where the settler project is continuously pumped with aid so that you do not see it dipping, and then there's a moment in which that economic argument wins, and then that is jettisoned. And that is what we have to believe that we're fighting for.
Hello, this is Philip. Okay. Hi. We've seen before talk a lot about how do you say the media have really got back for Israel in quite a big way, like just complete denial of reality. Something I see that I find very frustrating is demonstrations in Israel where everyone's waving the Israeli flag, asking for the hostages to come home, and this is framed as an anti-war protest. This is framed as a protest against the genocide, when it's really no such thing at all. It's, what you see from the press is the blame constantly of Netanyahu, Benjamin, or anyone like that, rather than being a settled state. This seems you know, have travelled to Gaza recent times and to deal with sort of Israel more directly. Would you say there is any sort of sincere anti-war, anti-genocide movement in Israel in any real capacity?
So one of the interesting things that we've seen in Western media in this war is that the Western media before this war, its job was to censor Palestinians. Since the war happened, since the 7th of October, the job of Western media is to censor the Israelis so that people here do not hear their genocidal intent being verbalized in such a bizarre way. Everybody from Netanyahu through the army down to the members of the Israeli parliament, to the man on the street, to the 150 Israeli doctors who signed the petition and paid for it to be shown on the newspapers calling for the bombing of Shifa Hospital, have been verbalizing genocide. That's why the South African submission to the ICJ was easy to do, because part of the war crime of genocide is genocide intent, and Israelis have been very clear. And so what Western media has done is not censor Palestinians, it's censor Israelis, so that you do not hear them talk about their genocidal deeds, so that you can read more in Hamas and Yadawah about this genocide than you can do in the BBC, or you can do in Channel 4. But if you ever have access to Israeli media, the destruction, the killing, openly on daytime television, discussing the logic of killing children because you don't kill them and they come back as terrorists in the future. All of this now is not in hushed voices, but you don't hear about it because the Western media's job is to make sure nobody hears about it, but the Israelis are saying they want to. That's the irony of this war. But we should, it's about lighting up the system. At the end of the day, the media is the voice box of the ruling elite. The media is not betraying its country. The media is actually being very open in its support of its country. And the solution is for us to find alternative ways of communicating with others that bypass it.
That's your question. Can I just have a show of hands of how many people would like to ask a question because we're running out of time? So, can we have a final round and then 3 questions? Let's go ahead, please.
Absolutely.
Keep it brief, please.
Well, my question is very simple. Is there anything that you think we can do better as a movement here in Scotland in our activity for Palestine?
You want another question? No? Yes? Oh, yeah. Okay. Another question.
I've tried to be involved in like student activism at UG and like fundraising and obviously as the years go on, the academic years go on, it's been pretty scary to see like the increase in sanctions and police, like seeing social media, so police being called on students for non-violent protests and things, and sort of like having tried to organise fundraisers and things, I was wondering whether, from your experience, what do you think we could do better to fundraise and help support Palestinians on the ground in light of the blockade? And also, what do you think the future of the student movement might look like at U of G and also other campuses across Scotland and the UK in the light of escalating repression and protests?
Hi, sorry, I was just going to ask, how can we have any faith in the international criminal court or international law when it so obviously doesn't apply in this case, and isn't this just making a blueprint for other countries and other regions to be able to do whatever they will wish to a population of where does that leave us as a nation, as a country, and everything is the rule of law just doesn't apply?
So, in terms of the movement, I think there are several issues that are very specific to Scotland that should be rallying points. One is that considerable parts of the 50% of the components of the F-35s that are bombing people in their tents in Gaza are made in Scotland. And that the way in which the British ruling class intentionally binds working class Scottish people to the imperialist project through this, having destroyed every other avenue for industrial employment. And that is a big part of the struggle. Two, the problem that capitalism has always had is that the law has always been its Achilles heel. Capitalism cannot function without the law, and therefore continues taking individuals, companies, and institutions to national courts whenever possible, like the Hind Rajab Foundation is doing, chasing Israeli war criminals across the globe. And there are Scottish, Israeli army veterans living in Scotland who have just come back from Gaza. We know that. And they need to be found, identified, and taken to court. Those companies that are shareholders, those institutions, including the universities, that are shareholders in the companies that are manufacturing these weapons, that are committing the war crimes, need to be taken to court. All of this is about increasing the price of the settler colonial project and all of these things. The student movement is about to get much more radical. You can feel it. The students that I met last year, and then the new students that I met this year's students are frustrated. They're frustrated and they've lost that sense of reverence that their previous student generations had towards these institutions that now they see as enablers of child murder. And therefore, there's the likelihood of more direct action is going to be much more likely because of the repression. People, every time the state represses people then go on their phones and they see the Palestinians being made to pay a bigger price. And then they come back on the streets with more resolve because they feel that what I'm being asked to pay is nothing compared to what's happening to these people. International law, the thing about it is they want us to give up on it. That's the aim. That's why they're performing this jettisoning. And therefore, the thing that even if we lose hope, we need to continue holding on to them. We need to continue holding them to them. And I mean, in a completely separate way, one of the most disgusting things that we've watched is the meeting between Giuliani and Trump and the plans to bring Giuliani to the UK to meet Keir Starmer. Every family within the Muslim community that has been destroyed by Prevent and by the war on terror because some kid went onto some website and now a known founding member of Al-Qaeda and ISIS who had $10 million on his head.
But I think touching on all of these different aspects, you have given us a lot of ideas and suggestions and food for thoughts about how we can increase our solidarity and our effectiveness. And I think also hopefully feed our hope when we feel the despair because of everything that is going on and that we're also witnessing. The evening is not over. So actually, first of all, let's give another round of applause.